Welcome to I Protest. This is Donald Jeffries. No music today. We're still having glitches with that. So, coming to you from just outside the Swamp and Fest of Washington, D.C., as we do every Friday from 5 to 7 p.m. We have a return guest. We had issues, I guess it was about a month ago or so when he was on before with his internet or somebody was messing with things, which viewers of the show know happens quite a bit when I Protest is on the air. So, Ken McCarthy, welcome back, and we're gonna discuss a lot of stuff. But I mean, this book's here, what the nurses saw, and it's obviously about on COVID during the COVID psyop, and I can relate to that. What happened to my brother? We have Fauci's first fraud. Another one should be of interest to people, and interest to me as a Kennedy fanboy, John F. Kennedy anti-imperialist. So we'll discuss. We'll see how the discussion goes, and we'll take on other subjects as well. So hopefully, the connection will be much better this time. Ken, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Great, and we're back on YouTube. Last week, after another show, YouTube suspended me again, but only for 1 week this time. So that was nice. The suspension wasn't quite as long. So we're back. So we have our bigger audience. So we'll have a better chat room and everything. It's good to see the people after us. You saw the familiar faces, and they're Deborah Wheeler and my buddy Vince and Piper Fogel. So good to see you all. We'll call you out later if you have questions, whatever. So Ken, I guess, since we didn't get much out of the first show because we had so many issues, I might have asked you this before, but how did you come to stray into these waters? I ask everybody this because as somebody I've never not been a radical. I was a radical teenager, and when I was volunteering for Mark Lane's Citizens Committee of Inquiry about the JFK assassination, so I've always been awake. Back when almost nobody was. What was were you a normal guy and just going along the system, and then suddenly you had an epiphany or something happened, or have you always suspected things as well?
I was probably never a normal guy. I was in grammar school, and I went to my public library, and I don't know what the book was. So this would have been either the late 60s or the early 70s. And there was a book, and I took it home, and it was on the Kennedy assassination. And I remember looking at the picture of the grassy knoll and some smoke around the grassy knoll. And as I'm reading this book, it suddenly dawned on me, oh my God, they killed the president. And I remember the hairs going up on the back of my neck. And I guess that's where I started. That's how I got into this.
Well, that's great. That's great. Yeah. So you started at a very young age too. And so what did you, as you went on, did you have like a relatively normal life, a business career or anything like that? And you just kind of did this on the side, or did this all?
Oh yeah. No, obviously, yeah. I had a business, and a career of sorts, and a business that did pretty well. And but I've always been interested. And even when I was running my business, I foolishly was, I'd spend all day working on my business and then another 4 or 5 hours working on stuff like this for decades. So I'm drawing on a pretty deep well here.
Well, that's great. And I know you were giving out great information before. I'm trying to figure how, we just kept losing it because at one point you were talking and it was great. It's just you couldn't hear us and you didn't know we could hear you. It was good stuff. So if we could kind of recreate that in some way, I guess I think that, I don't know, you can stress what you want and emphasize what you want, but I mean,
sure.
What is what the nurses saw is what was going on in hospitals. And I think I told you my brother was a victim of hospital protocol. So that obviously matters to me the most. But I guess what talked about that book first. And we just who did you talk to, and how did that come about?
Sure. So if anybody uses Twitter X and they go to my account, which is Ken McCarthy, and they search February 1st, 2020. February 1st, 2020, COVID hadn't even left China yet.
Right.
And I posted 2 things. I said, this is a vaccine marketing exercise, and they're going to use more speed than science to come out with a new and improved method for stopping the coronavirus, which of course is so common and has been common for probably all of mammalian history. So I was pretty early on the bullshit detector side. And then I saw Erin Marie Olszewski, wonderful human being. And she had a surrogate, somebody talk for her on YouTube. I don't know if everybody remembers, but the very first thing that came out was a nurse talking on behalf of another nurse. And the nurse she was talking on behalf of was Erin, Erin, and Olszewski is Erin Marie, Olsewski. And the story she was telling was horrific, that they were basically just killing patients left and right. And I actually have had experiences with New York City operated hospitals, so I'm not surprised about anything that goes on in those hospitals. So I was open-minded to it. And then another woman came out and she put her face on the camera. And I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on her name. But anyway, these two nurses made a big splash probably in May of 2020. And they were making very serious claims, but that were very plausible. And both of these nurses were veteran nurses. They weren't, fly-by-nights. They weren't people that just graduated from school. One of them had been a nurse in refugee camps and was also a flight nurse. In other words, they helicopter in. That's serious nursing. And Erin Marie had been an infantry woman during the Iraq War. So again, two very serious people. So anyway, that was 2020. I reached out to Erin. I did a pretty good interview with her, probably maybe the best anyone's ever done, because I got into all the technical issues that everybody kind of slipped by. And then I waited for someone to do a book, because to me, this is a sideline. This is not what I do, So I thought someone's going to write a book about this. No book came out in 2020. No book came out in 2021. No book came out in 2023. And I thought, by God, no one's going to write about this. So I asked Erin to see if she could connect me with other nurses who could, tell their version of the story. And so I ended up interviewing a whole bunch of nurses from all over the United States and Canada. And they all told the same exact story. And I said, oh my God, because I had just assumed that maybe, a New York City run hospital under Andrew Cuomo, probably inevitably would be a total cluster fudge, just a disaster of epic proportions. Right. That didn't surprise me. And malfeasance by doctors and nurses, I'm sorry to say, doesn't surprise me. But I thought it was limited to New York City. And I started talking with these nurses and I realized this was going on all over the country. And it has still not come out. I mean, my book's selling pretty well. I mean, you know how books go. This has sold over 15,000 copies. So it's not a zero. Now, some people may say, well, it's not a million seller. Well, I'm telling you right now, there aren't many million selling books, certainly of substance. So the book's getting out there, but it still is the great untold story of COVID. And you, like many other people, lost loved ones to this. And there may be people on the show listening right now who lost a loved one, or who are after the show are going to realize, hey, wait a minute, what actually happened to my loved one in that hospital? So the first set of numbers that everybody should be aware of is that something north of 1 million people died, in quotes, of COVID in the United States. That's over 1 million people. 92% of them died in a hospital under hospital care. Okay, that right away should have red lights flashing for people. Mm-hmm. All right. So let's look at what actually happened. So you're a patient. You have, indigestion, and you go to a hospital. You're pretty healthy, maybe not the healthiest guy in the world, but you're not that sick. You're pretty healthy. Mm-hmm. And immediately they start giving you COVID tests. And I say test plural, because if you didn't test positive the first time, they were going to give you another one and another one and another one until they came up with a positive test. Why? Because when somebody showed up at a hospital and got a positive COVID test, the cash register rang for that hospital. Okay, they got a bonus payment from the federal government. That was step one. Okay, step two, let's say you have, let's say you came with respiratory problems. All right. Now you're watching the news, you're hearing about COVID, you're freaking out, understandably so. You go to the hospital. Maybe you even have a respiratory problem, because people do have respiratory problems, pre-COVID, it happens. The normal treatment for respiratory distress in a hospital is ibuprofen and inhale steroids, right? And these assist the lungs in knocking down the inflammation and just getting the lung function to function better. During COVID, and this has never been reported, my book seems, and this is not disputed. It's known, but it's just not out there. During COVID, if you went to a hospital with lung distress and you had a positive COVID test, they would not give you anti-inflammatories and they would not give you steroids. This is the first time in the history of modern medicine that somebody presenting with respiratory distress was not given these basic medications. Now, they always talk about, oh, they didn't give them ivermectin, they didn't give them vitamin Q, all this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But they didn't even give them Advil. Right. And typically what they would do after that is the person would probably be freaked out. Right? They've heard this virus is floating around. They've heard it's deadly. Nobody escapes. Right? Now they're in a hospital. They're not getting treated. Their inflammation, their respiratory problems are getting worse. Stress, by the way, affects your ability to breathe. In fact, there's one very sad case that Erin told about, a 32-year-old man that came into the hospital with what she said was a clear panic attack. Just plain up, straight up panic attack. They intubated him, and in 3 days he was dead. But I'm jumping ahead of myself. So number one, they didn't do the basic first aid that a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout could have done. That was a new medical reality, right? The second thing they do is not necessarily in the order was a bit mixed up as you go down the line, but one of the things they do is say, you seem a little distressed. Would you like something to help you calm down? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now we're talking about tranquilizers. Two things. One, if you take a tranquilizer, that affects muscles. You breathe with muscles. If you're on a tranquilizer, your respiration is going to go down. Okay. So that is not, you do not give the tranquilizer to somebody that's having trouble breathing. All right. That's number one. The second thing is, speaking of alternate medical and legal realities, if you are in a hospital and you are offered psychoactive medications because you are anxious and you accept them, you are now a psychiatric patient, and you are now they are now able to keep you longer than if you were just a regular guy. You just can't walk out of the hospital because you might be of danger to yourself and others, right? So you have to be very careful. And you have to be careful about the dosing. Maybe they're going to overdose you. I don't mean overdose you to the point of killing you, but overdosing you to the point of you're not making clear decisions. So that was the next thing they would do to people. Another thing they do to people is they'd ventilate people externally. I forget what the technical term is, but it's a mask. It fits very tightly over the face, straps behind you, and it just pounds air down your throat. And it's very uncomfortable. It's very anxiety provoking. And so in a normal world, you would tell the patient, hey, listen, you're having trouble breathing. This might help. It's going to be a little uncomfortable. Don't worry. We're going to be here. If it's too much, let us know. That's the way it's normally done. What they did in COVID, strapped it on your face, cranked it up, and left you in the room alone.
Well, they quarantined him too. I mean, that's the most important thing. Once you got that COVID diagnosis, which they got 13,000 for or whatever from the stimulus act, my brother was quarantined, so I never got to see him. 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's a very important point, and that's part of the alternate medical and legal reality. If you got a COVID diagnosis, you were sent to a COVID ward, which was locked down, and
yes,
family members couldn't see them, lawyers couldn't see them, your doctor couldn't see you. Your priest couldn't see you. Nobody could see you. That's a really important part of this. So the person's already frightened. They're already having some kind of medical problem. And now they've got this thing on their face, and they don't know what to expect, and it is really uncomfortable, and nobody is helping them through it. So a lot of people would get agitated and anxious, at which point the tranquilizers would really come out. Okay, then the next thing they do is say, well, you got COVID and you're having trouble breathing. We do have a treatment for it. It's called remdesivir. And remdesivir, for people that aren't aware, was a drug they cooked up to treat Ebola. It was withdrawn from using Ebola on Ebola patients. Why? Because it has a tendency to destroy kidneys. In fact, there was this myth about Ebola that, oh, this virus makes your organs blow up. And they were even saying that about COVID in the very early months. This is the most amazing virus I've ever seen. You know, it goes in your lungs and then it makes your kidneys fail. Well, no, it was the remdesivir. So the hospitals were paid to administer remdesivir as well. So they got paid if they got a positive test. They got paid if they check you in. They got paid if you got a bag of remdesivir or bags of remdesivir. And so you understand, this is a bag, it's hung, and it's put into your arm intravenously. It's a lot of drugs. And the nurses that I talked to, the experienced nurses, you know, in the beginning, they were just going on what they were told. They were told, this is the cure, this is the treatment, use it. And very quickly, they were seeing, whoa, this is not only not helping, this is killing people. And so that was the very first pushback by some nurses. And I have to say right away, just so that people understand, it was a handful of nurses that pushed back. Way towards the end of the research, I asked the question that I almost didn't want the answer to, which is, tell me, nurse, what percentage of the nurses pushed back? And they were like, well, they didn't want to tell me. And I almost didn't want to know. And I said, was it less than 10%? And they said, oh yeah, way less than 10%. So basically, what can we say? 90%, 95%, 99%, 99.9% of the nurses went along with this. So the remdesivir was blatantly and obviously killing people. And the position of the hospitals was, keep giving it to them. And if you don't give it to them, you're out of here. And so one of the nurses that I interviewed was fired. This is the one that was the flight nurse, you know, the super emergency, amazing nurse. You know, they practically better than most doctors. Well, they are better than most doctors because that's a low bar. And she was just flat out fired. She said, they said to her, if you're not going to do what we're telling you, you're out of here. By the way, what were they paying nurses? And I don't know what they were paying them in other places, but in New York City, nurses who came to work COVID wards on a contract basis were being paid $10,000 per week by FEMA. Okay, so when you hear about, and the other thing the nurses told me, like one of them said, well, we arrived in New York City and we spent 15 days in a hotel in Times Square. And Times Square is a nice place now. Very expensive to stay in Times Square, just cooling our heels. So we're like, where's the emergency? What's the big rush? But meanwhile, they're getting paid $10,000, being put up in the hotel, right? So they were also bringing in nurses who had from other countries, totally unprecedented. If you are a nurse or a doctor and you have a great degree from Austria or Germany or Japan, and you have 20 years of experience and you come to the United States, you are qualified to mop floors. They will not allow you to practice medicine until you jump through 10,000 hoops. During COVID, any foreign doctor or nurse who could fog a mirror was invited to come to the United States and work on one of these wards. Some of them had a lot of trouble speaking English, by the way. But I'm sure they had no trouble understanding what the check was they were getting every week. And that was a huge problem. So we have denying people basic medical care. We have them, putting these I'm just trying to blank on that name, but these
intubators or
no, it's late in the day here for me. It's non-invasive.
Sure.
Yeah, whatever. They call it non-invasive because it's outside your face, right? Non-invasive, but distressing. Speaking of distressing, patients were left alone. They weren't
That's
checked
right.
on. They weren't fed. They weren't brought water. They weren't cleaned. It was horrendous. Sometimes they even had the rack of medications in the hallway, and the lines would come in through a crack in the door. The nurses wouldn't even go in. They would change the bag of medication and not even look to see what condition the patient was in. Erin, who gathered a tremendous amount of video evidence and is working on a court case on this, she said she would go home on her shift with patients that she was bringing back to life, basically. And when she got back from sleeping, because you have to sleep, the patients would be dead. She went into a room with after coming back, back on shift, and there was a guy that had been dead. He'd obviously been dead for many, many, many hours. So this was the level of care they were receiving. Then the next and final coup de grace was this thing called intubation, which is very invasive. They knock you out, and then they stick what they call the garden hose down your throat. This is a medical procedure. It's invasive. It has its role. If you're in a catastrophic car accident and you've stopped breathing, well, maybe we try to keep this guy breathing till he can recover from the shock. But it's not something that's done lightly. It's something that's done as the absolute last resort. And they were throwing everybody on on invasive intubation. And in order to be intubated and put on ventilation, invasive ventilation, they have to drug you to the nines. They have to give you analgesics, painkillers, which includes fentanyl, very commonly used in intubation. They have to knock you out. And they have to give you what's called antiparalytics. And these are drugs that keep your body from moving because you can't be thrashing around. And it's not like you take a pill here and you're knocked out. They just put a line in your arm, and they've got anywhere from 5 to 15 bags of different drugs that they're pumping into you nonstop. And of course, you're knocked out, so you're not eating, you're not drinking, you can't take care of yourself, so somebody's got to clean you. And they were not cleaning these patients. I asked about, well, what kind of water are these people getting? Because, it doesn't take too long to get dangerously dehydrated. And the answer was, well, there's water in the drugs that we're giving them. So that's the water they're getting.
Well,
And then
sorry, but when my brother went in, I was already educated enough where I knew about remdesivir and I knew about ventilators. But the problem is, and this is what's so tragic about it, you lose somebody and you're powerless because you can't go see them. The hospital had armed guards at the door. You couldn't. I mean, they had armed guards there. I mean, I don't know if anybody was shot during this, but I guess conceivably they could have been. But I had no idea until afterwards. I learned, for instance, the do not resuscitate order, which nobody gave them that, but they were doing it for all the patients. They wanted whatever that end money was, and this was just terrible. And I had no idea they weren't feeding him. I didn't know that was a standard that they were doing. I mean, and because they have them quarantined, nobody could see. Obviously, they wanted, because if any loved one had seen what they were doing, they would have raised hell. I mean, the idea that what you're describing is barbaric, and the fact that only a small percentage of nurses. I mean, I understand you're doing your job, and I guess if they're paying you $10,000 a week, you have a big incentive, not to look too closely at what's going on. But I mean, how could you, if you have anything in you about trying to care for people, to know how wrong this is? And the fact that more people didn't complain is shocking. And hats off to the few that did. But I just wanted to say that.
Well, they were very brave, and they paid the price. I mean, they were fired, obviously, but some of them were also professionally blackballed. In other words, they had a lot of trouble getting new jobs. There was a group, and this sounds like a wild conspiracy theory, but we documented absolutely thoroughly in the group. I think the Undersecretary of Communications of the United Nations made an alliance with this group of doctors and nurses who were going to go out and get on social media and tell the truth about the value of vaccines, right? Well, what that degenerated into very quickly was an online mob. And one of the things, a protected online mob, by the way, you or I say one word out of line, and our account, my account on Twitter, you can go see it. I can't post to it. I can't access Twitter. They haven't deleted it, but I can't get on it. But you or I say one thing out of line and we're dead. But these people, these vigilantes, under the umbrella of the UN, believe it or not, were able to say anything they wanted, including doxing, giving out the private addresses of nurses who were complaining about what was going on in the hospitals. And the other trick they play is they would have people challenge these people's licenses. So anybody can challenge anybody's license. So if you're living in Utah or wherever, and you want to challenge somebody's license in Florida, and you don't know the nurse, you never met the nurse, you don't know anything about the nurse, you're allowed to file a complaint against them, and that's what these doxers did. So the nurses that did fight back paid a terrible price. Many of the nurses that were on these floors were from overseas, or they were not ICU, they were not intensive care unit experienced, or they were relatively recent nursing school graduates that hadn't had any practical experience. And I heard there were also nurses that hadn't even gotten their degrees yet. So they, again, all standards, all normal medical standards were thrown out the window, and everybody was invited to come on board and work in one of these ICUs. And there were doctors, who were podiatrists, and ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Because they were putting so many people on respirators, they call them respirators, invasive intubation. And under normal circumstances, you will have one full-time guy, a respiratory technician. Respiratory therapist. Yeah. Sounds like a simple profession. It's not. It's very deep. You need a lot of training to do it, right? Yeah. Typically, you'll have a full-time guy who has nothing else to do but supervise 3 or maybe 4 patients that are on respirators, on intubation. There were situations where one respiratory therapist would be dealing with 30 or 40 people. Crazy, just impossible situation. So this was when you don't treat people, like not giving somebody anti-inflammatories when they have a lung problem. It's like a fireman showing up at a burning house and just standing there with his hose and not turning it on. So So when you do that, and then you put people on psych meds, and then you scare them to death, because you can scare people into illness, believe me. And then you load them up with remdesivir, which is known to cause organ failure, and then you put them on invasive respiration, and don't care for them. That's as close as you can get to murdering somebody without putting a gun to their head and pulling the trigger. I mean, it's just really close. Putting somebody on intubation is, under the best of circumstances, considered a really serious, dicey operation. It's got a lot of dangers. It's got a lot of hazards. And when people get off that thing, they're wrecked. I mean, they've been knocked out. Their bodies are filled with really toxic drugs. So what did the federal government do? They incentivized hospitals to keep people on respirators for a minimum of, I think it was 98 hours, 96 hours. I can't remember. Under normal circumstances, if somebody has to be intubated, within 24 hours, you're testing to see if you can get them off, if they're strong enough to get them off. You want to get them off and breathing on their own as soon as you can, because every hour they're under that drug haze and not breathing on their own, they're getting weaker and weaker and sicker and closer to death. So when you realize that was the protocol, enforced rigorously by the hospital administrators, and people should know this: the doctors don't run the hospitals, the nurses don't run the hospitals, the administrators don't run the hospitals, and the people who run the administrators are the CFOs, the money men of the hospitals. And the hospitals are typically part of a hospital chain. So somebody in Washington, they got around a conference table with a whiteboard, and they figured out what the acceptable protocol would be for treating COVID. They incentivized all these crazy things, and then they passed it down to the CFOs of these hospital chains. You didn't need to persuade those guys. They saw, wow, this is the cash cow of all cash cows. We get paid when they're positive. We get paid when we give them for every course of remdesivir. We get paid when they put them on intubation. If we keep them on for 96 hours or more, we get paid again. So it was a major cash cow, and the anybody that didn't go along was removed from the building.
No, and we just it's the tragic part again, having experienced this personally, is that I was educated on it. I knew, and there was nothing I could do. My brother was a hypochondriac. That was his problem. And and ironically, it killed him because he called an ambulance in the middle of the night for something stupid, which he would do, and he was in the hospital by the time I found out. I wasn't there to stop him. I'm still haunted by that, and there was nothing I could do. I couldn't go see him. I did talk to a couple of doctors on the phone, and I told them immediately. I said, "No remdesivir." Of course, they were saying, "Well, why?" I said, "No remdesivir," and I said, "No ventilators." And keep in mind, he was completely healthy when he came in. He had no symptoms at all. But he wasn't vaccinated. Once they found out he wasn't vaccinated, their eyes really lit up. They gave him the 90% false positive PCR test, and lo and behold, he's fine. Once he has COVID because he said, "I have COVID." I said, "Ah." So I knew what that meant, and I'm sitting there powerless, quarantined for, I think they quarantined him for 21 days. Well, he was dead in 2 weeks. So there's nothing I could do, and they took a perfectly healthy guy, and I had to sit there and think of this, and this is why people wonder why I complain so much about the medical industrial complex. First of all, I worked for them for many years. I worked
really?
IT most of the time. Oh yes, I saw the sausage being made, and I could tell you stories, you would not believe, but I mean, I have such a low opinion of them, but even I didn't think they would do something like this. And the idea, and you tell me they're paying nurses $10,000 a week. I mean, look how much was committed to this psyop. I mean, to pay somebody 10, we were all haunted. And after he died, it was cathartic for me to write about it. And people responded so well and made me feel better. And I heard from people all over the world who experienced the same thing. And I had several of them on my show, including a woman who happened at the same hospital. And so, this happened to who knows how many. We still don't know, but all of us are haunted by the fact that we weren't allowed to be there. All this happened because nobody could monitor it because their son, even though I told them no remdesivir, they went ahead and did it. And
Sure.
I found out later, 2 days before he died, I found out they'd given him remdesivir, and I was so mad. And I said, "What do you?" He said, "Well, he consented." I said, "Yeah, he consented." And then they put him on a ventilator again, and I had said no ventilators. And you're sitting there remotely. What are you going to do? There's nothing you could do, and it's just a horrible situation. And these people have to be held accountable. I don't expect they ever will, but do you know what the status is? Because I know that there's at least one lawsuit that was filed, I think, in California about this a couple years ago. I never heard anything about it. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know that particular one. It is really tough sledding to bring any justice in this situation. There were laws passed, instant laws that said anything that happens in the treatment of COVID is okay. This whole thing was treated like a national security risk. And that's why I keep saying you entered a new legal, medical and legal reality. That's why all the money spigots were turned on. Oh, just throw as much money as the hospitals can absorb.
Yeah.
And yeah, Don, this happened to countless families and to some not only to family members of informed people, but also to informed people. I've heard from more than one person there.
I have one. What was the guy's name? Maybe somebody in the chat knows. No, I can't. He was very prominent in podcasting, and I had his wife on the show, and he knew all about it. But he actually had, I don't know what was wrong with him, but he obviously felt very sick because to go to something like this. But they ended up, they killed him. And so you're right. I mean, this is, and what was the guy, Robert David Steele? who was very big in this, and a lot of people accused him of being a CIA disinfo agent. He and I worked together once on a Caravan to Midnight show, John B. Wells years ago. But
Mm.
um, regardless, he was very prominent on social media saying this was a hoax and everything. A lot of what we were saying, this is ridiculous, or this is what they're telling you are lies. And somehow he ended up in the hospital, and he was on a ventilator. They showed up, and why did he allow him? So I don't know, but
well, let's look at the psychology of it, right? I don't know if you've ever been in a hospital. I have, and
yeah,
you kind of are at their mercy, you know.
yeah,
You
you are,
kind of,
you are.
you know. And remember, I mentioned the tranquilizers. All right, so they're applying you with tranquilizers. Well, if anybody's ever taken those, you know, things don't seem so serious when you're
Sure,
on Valium. You know,
area, sure,
yeah,
yeah, exactly.
and then also coercion. It's not that your brother consented. I'm sure they coerced the hell out of him.
Of course.
And the same thing with the ventilation. In fact, we've got a video somewhere. It could be on we have a website called What the Nurses Saw, and we've got lots and lots of videos on there. WhatTheNursesSaw.com.
Yes, Karen Carpenter. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, Rob Skiba. That's exactly right, Karen. I'm sorry. Rob Skiba is the guy.
Okay.
And an update there, Karen. If you know, since I had his wife on the show, I found out that she died, and I don't know exactly from what, but I read somewhere online. So sorry, this is going to stop. That's the world we live in. It's just craziness. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Well, I have a colleague who I'm not going to mention his name, but he's controversial. We'll say that. And he needed an operation, so he went to Japan. He's an American. He was not going to go into any American hospital, given you know his background and you know what people think about him. So a lot of coercion. People that were not vaccinated, they were treated very badly. That's systematic across the board. If we have one story, we have 10,000 of them. There is at least one sort of families victims group in Minnesota, and I'm sorry I don't know the name offhand, but it's in the book. It's also on our website, I believe. We have resources on our website that people can check out, and they're trying the legal thing, and it's really not getting anywhere with them. But one thing they are doing, and this I do recommend to people, believe it or not, like the Nazis, hospitals keep very good records. And the reason they keep very good records is they charge you for every breath you take. And they want to make sure if they give you an aspirin that they're charging $95 for that aspirin.
Yes.
So believe it or not, these murderous thugs have left behind a paper trail that shows every single medical procedure that was done to every one of these people that died. And you will, like, one guy was on 15 different drugs. He'd never been on any medications before. And within 2 weeks, they had him on 15 different drugs, a lot of them psychoactive medications, multiple courses of remdesivir, not just one bag, but multiple bags. And all this is recorded. So it depends on the state you're in, but in many states, if you're not represented by an attorney, you can go to the hospital and say, give me the records. And they have to either give them to you or make them available to you at a nominal cost. If you have an attorney involved, they're going to charge you $1 to $2 a page. And some of these hospital records are 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 pages long. All right. So if somebody wants to have the record of what happened to their loved one in the hospital, depending on the state you're in, you don't go with a lawyer. But if you're just Joe Citizen, they have to give it to you. And, you know, at least you'll have the record and you'll be able to read it or hire someone to read it for you. And you're probably going to be shocked at all the things that went down. And again,
I just want to real quickly shout out, Cecilia 14 over on the Rumble chat. And she looks like she's the only one in there. She's posted many times. I'm just checking it now, Cecilia. I'm sorry I didn't see it. And I'm sorry. It looks like it said she's telling a story here that they killed her dad, and that's very. I'm sorry. Well, I'm sorry for your loss too, and thanks for that. So, I'm sorry, Cecilia. I do jump back and forth, and this is the first time I looked at it because more people are in the YouTube chat. But if maybe you come on over YouTube, I'll see what you're saying. I'm very, very sorry for your loss. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I just wanted to address her because she posted a lot of messages over there.
Well, and you know, and that is the bottom line. this was a horror. And there are a lot of people who's lost fathers, husbands, brothers, sisters, mothers, aunts, children.
Yeah.
And they would have these news stories. Oh, so and so he was perfectly healthy, and then he had COVID. Now look at him. And they leave out the fact that he was on invasive intubation for 72 days. He's lucky he's alive.
Well, did you hear about Grace Shara, who's had
Sure,
Down
yeah,
syndrome?
sure.
Yeah,
No intubate. They just drugged her to death.
yeah, and I had her father on the show, Peter Scott Shara, a while back, and just recently they lost a court case. He took him to court. A jury ruled in favor of the hospital. This is why I try to tell people, I don't know what the answer is. The entire system is so rotten. What kind of jury would do that? But again, that's the problem. Jury nullification is possible. Juries can help with unjust things, but they don't. What I would love to question every member of the jury. What would you
Yeah.
possibly rule in favor of the hospital there? And so that man must be crushed. He's tried so hard, and he put everything he could into and we keep having these legal defeats, and I don't know what the answer is. Maybe you have an idea, but I don't know what we can do. I really don't.
Well, people have to become knowledgeable about health. It's not an option. And it's hard because, excuse me, the information's withheld to a large degree. There is a lot of snake oil out there too, which doesn't help. But we've got to understand basic principles of health. Anybody that understood basic principles of health should have been able to see that the COVID con was a con job from day one.
Yeah.
Oh, this thing, it's so transmissible, and you just someone across the street could give it to you, and once you got it, you're dead. That doesn't make any sense. There aren't diseases like that, and the reason we know there aren't diseases like that is because we're here.
Right.
If that kind of biological thing was possible, the mammalian species, forget human beings, mammals would have died out hundreds of millions of years ago. So I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, and the idea, and again, we have people like Dr. Andrew Kaufman, who I had on early on the show before he exploded, and he went to bigger and better things. But he was one of the ones pushing and lots of people now believe there is no such thing as viruses. I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence, and I don't know enough. But if you accept viral theory, the idea is that viruses come in the fall, and they burn out with the spring when this thing starts heating up. This one never burned out. And how many times did you hear about a new COVID outbreak in the summer somewhere? And COVID-19, that's because it was the 2019 version of the yearly coronavirus. What happened to COVID-20? What happened to COVID-21, 22? We should be on COVID-25 now. Right. Nobody asked that. It's still COVID. It's just now COVID, a blanket thing. And it's not like a bad strain of the flu. It's here forever. It's like people are still getting COVID tests and still claiming they're getting COVID. And as I said at the time, look, I know lots of people got sick, and I've heard from, I know what I had. Okay, yeah, but your symptoms are indistinguishable from the cold or the flu. It's not like your your hand would turn green or something different to just, okay, well, that's obviously COVID. It's the same thing, cough, respiratory distress. All the stuff that you would get with something else. It just, but this is so severe, and maybe it was, it obviously could be more serious, but people just turned off their critical faculties, and once they determined that they had, I've got COVID now, geez, and it was very disillusioning for me to see how many more people fell for this nonsense than the people that were saying, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, well, it's how they say, you frame somebody, right? In a criminal case, you frame a guy. You basically, literally, you put a frame around him, and you gather all this fake evidence, and now he looks like a criminal, right? Well, it's the same thing with these symptoms. Like, everybody gets tired. They're like, I can't get out of bed. What's wrong with me? And et cetera, et cetera. And they put a frame around that and said, oh, that's a deadly virus from China. It came from a monkey, or it came from a bat, or it came from a groundhog, or whatever they were saying originally. And now they're saying, oh, it came from the lab. It came from this. It came from that. But the reality is probably that, we're very sunlight dependent people. And in the spring and summer, we're out and about quite a bit, breathing fresh air, getting sun on us. And as the fall comes, we're getting less sunlight. We're indoors more. And we're more likely to get run down and quote, catch something, you know? Yeah. So people need to realize you're kind of on your own when it comes to health. And, if you have bad health habits, you might want to start, looking at them and getting rid of them one by one. If you're eating junk, you might want to eat less. If you're not getting up off the couch ever, you might want to do a daily walk. There's a lot of things that we can do. And then,
Right.
and yeah.
No, as I wrote in my own book, Masking the Truth, how COVID-19 destroyed civil liberties and shut down the world, the most shadow banned book in the world. I could just tell you stories of what they've done with that book. It's incredible to try to stop it from being out there. And much of the alt media has ignored it as well. But as I, said in that book is that, you have to look at what are we looking here? What were the symptoms? The COVID-19, the strain, they tell you it's never been isolated. They tell you, in fact, when there was a woman in Canada that filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, and she wanted to know the particulars about the isolates they used in developing the warp speed vaccine, because you have to have the thing you're being vaccinated against, right? And it's the whole vaccine theory, right? Well,
Right.
the FDA wrote her back finally after she filed the request and said, unfortunately, there were no isolates available. There's never been any isolates available because they don't exist, or they can't prove they exist. So they had to simulate it by using remnants of the coronavirus. So what fun? You wonder why this stupid whatever you're shooting in yourself doesn't work. I mean, but you tell people that, and they give you. I've got people in my family and friends and stuff that have had COVID 3 or 4, so-called COVID 3 or 4 times. They've got 10 boosters or whatever, and I try to say, do you question that? That maybe that you got vaccinated against this thing, and yet you still got it. Doesn't that make you question it?
Yeah, if I had more time, I would write a book on the fact that everything related to COVID was computer generated, AI generated, actually. So the model for what the virus looked like, no one has ever seen this virus. It's just folks don't know that. You can't like how they would put that on TV and it would be like a blob with the red hairs coming off it. That's like somebody's imagination, literally. So they imagine that. They use computer modeling to come up with that. Then they use that computer model to say, okay, what would if something like that really looked that way, what would we use to knock it out? They use computer modeling to figure out the vaccine. They also use computer modeling to figure out how fast it would spread. Remember, we were going to have like 2 million dead in England, and 100, right? That was all computer modeling. Now everybody knows about ChatGPT and the ability to generate instant articles. Everybody knows that now, but that existed semi-privately before ChatGPT was available to the public. So they even used AI to generate bogus articles. Some of you may have remember seeing articles that seemed like, I forget, it was always the same number. I can't remember. It was like 67. Like 67 people have died in Idaho this year from COVID alone, right? And then in Iowa, 67. It's like, so basically what they were doing is called spinning articles. You drop in some data and you push a button and out comes an article. So this whole thing, from the modeling of the virus to the modeling of the vaccine to the modeling of how fast it was going to spread to the modeling to the spinning of articles and flooding the news media with them, all of this was computer generated. Now, my view of, and I'm entitled to have a view just like anybody else. My view of viruses and bacteria and all this is they get free reign when you're run down. Okay. Sure. If you're overworked, you're overstressed, you're poorly nourished, you're not getting up from the sofa, you're eating junk, you've maybe had a big shock in your life. There's all kinds of things that can knock you down. That will make you susceptible to illness. And it's like if anybody has ever been a gardener, when your plants are very well fertilized, not over fertilized, but well fertilized, the bugs don't come around. Bugs come around and eat sick plants. And there are many master gardeners that can show that to you, So we have to be knowledgeable about how, look, we also have to understand we are mortal flesh. We are going to die. Okay. I mean, this may seem like a silly thing to say. And we deny that in our culture, and we deny that in our lives. And we have this thing in the back of our mind that says, if we just do what the doctor says, we're going to live forever, or we're going to live without pain, or we're going to live without illness. Sorry.
Yeah.
We are mortal flesh, and all kinds of stuff can and will happen. And it's just the way it is. Can doctors help? Sure. Can they save you? Sometimes. But very often, as anybody that's ever dealt with these guys know, they don't know what they're doing. They can't diagnose. All they know is the 3 or 4 drugs they've been told to prescribe. Right. They don't even know the adverse reactions of the drugs they're prescribing, and they don't give you any time anyway.
Yes.
So
the system's horrible.
Yeah, we have to get smarter about our health and smarter about common sense, and have faith in nature. I was once poisoned. So it's an odd thing. I got poisoned 3 different ways simultaneously from two places, one where I was living, one where I was working, that had black mold in the walls. I didn't know it, didn't smell it. And then I got exposed to some really powerful industrial chemicals that were not supposed to be toxic, and turned out to be very toxic. And I became very ill for a long time. And you know what? The only thing that helped me, luckily it was summer, sitting under a tree in the shade, on a blanket all day long with as little clothes on as I could manage, and just being outside and just getting all those toxins out of me. There was no drug I could take. There was no doctor I could go to. There was no procedure that was going to speed it up. My body had to heal itself. And being exposed to being in nature is a great healing thing. I got to tell you, there's a book, came out in like 1918 or something. And it was like a guide to health. And it was a major national product, like ex-presidents endorsed it. And, their first recommendation was get outside and breathe fresh air. And they go, why? And this is what they were saying in 1918. The reason outdoor air is better is because you have ultraviolet light, and ultraviolet light kills pathogens, right? So, which makes sense, right? 1918. So what were they telling people during COVID 100 years later? Don't go outside.
Oh yeah. Well, even before that, you remember they went through this period of time where they had people putting on like 80 sunscreens, doing everything to stop the sun from possibly hitting. Yeah, and I know some people are fair skinned, they get sunburned, but you use common sense. You don't stay out too much the first time or whatever. But I mean, the idea that the sun could be unhealthy for you and has so many vitamin D healing properties and everything. I mean, they give so much bad advice, but people listen to them and pay a lot to listen to them as well.
Yeah. So, you just have to think we're not these. I mean, we're on the one hand, we're unbelievably resilient. And on the other hand, we have real fragilities. We're going to die. I mean, let's face that, guys. So we have that fragility. But we got a lot of resilience, and we're made pretty well. Occasionally you have somebody that loses the genetic lottery and they have a real major genetic problem, but that's pretty rare. And if you have one or not. Otherwise, it's up to you to maintain, and take care of yourself. And let's say this, part of taking care of yourself is not handing yourself over to a doctor and assuming he or she knows what they're doing. You got to double check everything they do. I'll tell you one minimal thing everybody needs to do. When a doctor blithely gives you a drug and says, start taking this, it'll improve your life. Go on the internet, find the official FDA sheet, the full one, and read all the adverse reactions that are possible. And you need to know those are not potential adverse reactions. Those are there to protect the drug company. Every time an adverse reaction is reported, they have to add it to the adverse reaction list. That's why it's on the list, not because it's a theory, but because it's happened to people. And we've all seen the TV commercials, right? Oh, look at this drug, clouds and green grass and balloons and life is beautiful. Could cause death, could cause paralysis. So you need to know those things. I had an employee, she came to work, looked like hell. I said, what happened to you, Bree? She said, I felt like I had a golf ball stuck in my neck all night. I'm like, what? That's very unusual. And I always ask, have you started any new medication? She goes, yeah, I just started this drug. So I said, let's go look at the FDA sheet. We're reading it. What was one of the adverse reactions? Breathing constriction in the throat. She went back to her freaking doctor told her doctor, and the doctor said, "Oh, I didn't know that. Can you tell me this? If I hired a guy to fix my car,
Yeah.
and he maybe he had to put in a part that was a little, he knew it was dicey, but it was the only part he could find, and I wanted to keep my car going, and he didn't know, he couldn't, he was like surprised. Oh, gee, I didn't know that part has a record of failing. Well, isn't that your job? And I want to tell some historical stuff, how we got into this mess.
Sure.
And one of the models for where we are now, believe it or not, is Nazi Germany. Okay. So one of the things that the Nazis were really interested in doing was figuring out who was Jewish and who was not Jewish, right? And they had this, they worked with IBM to do that, because it's hard. There's not a few people in Germany. There's tens of millions of people in Germany. You needed IBM power to keep track of who was who. And they wanted to know who was who. And as soon as they knew who was who, they passed a law and said, if you're Jewish, you can't be a doctor anymore. We're not going to relicense you. You're a head of a medical school, you're out. You're a head of public health in a state in Germany, you're out. You're a nurse, you're out. Who did they replace them with? Card-carrying Nazi party members, the low-level guys that couldn't get a job to save their life. And those guys ended up elevated, and they even had crash courses to help Nazis who were not quite finished their medical degrees accelerate their medical degrees. So basically what they did was they took out they took out a big important piece of German medicine, which were Jewish people, because they were very well represented in the medical profession. And they replaced them with literal Nazis. There was no profession in Germany that had as many party members. We're not talking about Germans that went along to save their skin. We're talking about these guys with the armbands. That the medical profession was the highest represented profession of Nazis in Germany. And how about this? How many camps were there in Germany? Right? People, they know Auschwitz, they know this, they know that. Well, those camps were labor camps, by the way. There were over 40,000 slave labor camps in Germany during World War II. You never hear that. Every one of those camps had a medical office with at least 2 or 3 or 4 people. Do the math. Let's say it was just 3. 3 times 40, 120,000 people. What was the job of the medical staff? Well, if you were a slave laborer, maybe you were Jewish, maybe you were a Russian POW, maybe you were a French civilian, because it wasn't just one group of people that got put in those camps, right? And you were sick. Well, they wanted to get the last week or 2 or a month out of you before they put you in a box or wherever they put you. So if you were healthy, they'd patch you up and they'd put you back on the assembly line. If they weren't, they would give you an injection and kill you. So there were at least 120, 150,000 doctors and nurses in Germany who were routinely murdering enslaved people. And what did they do? They wrote down in the death certificate, died of typhus or whatever. So they finally had a trial, the Nuremberg doctors trial. So on the one hand, you have like maybe 120, 130, 150,000 people that were murdering people on a daily, doctors that were murdering people on a daily basis. How many doctors do you think they had on trial? Less than 20.
Sure.
But what's interesting is one of the crimes these guys were tried for was, and this comes back to COVID, was falsifying a death certificate. That's a crime. And it's a serious crime because, if I'm a bad doctor, I could kill somebody and then write up his death certificate and say, oh, he fell on a banana,
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't really want doctors falsifying death certificates. What happened during COVID? Well, one guy, Scott Jensen, who was
I had Scott on my show a couple times. Yeah.
Scott's awesome.
Yes, he's great.
Scott's a doctor, and he got a letter from the state of Minnesota saying, listen, just call it COVID and call it a day.
Yep.
So we had, there's literal cases of people coming to the hospital with gunshot wounds.
Yeah.
And they give him a COVID test positive, the guy bleeds out, he died of COVID.
Oh.
So we have that historical precedent in the 20th century, but we also have something else. And this is my new book. It's called Diabolical Error. the strange and unsettling history of vaccine science. That's my new book. I'm right in the middle of
Yes.
it, and I
Yeah.
hope you give me a chance to talk about it when it's done.
Oh, of course.
Way back in I think it's 1848 or 1847, somewhere around there, in the 1840s, when the AMA, the American Medical Association, got founded in Philadelphia. Their original platform, and they wrote it out like this wasn't a secret thing that they were doing in the back room. They said, we want less doctors. There's too many freaking doctors in the United States and we can't make enough money. That was their first platform. Their second platform was, if you're an AMA member, you may not speak to other physicians like homeopathists or what they used to call osteopaths. There was another kind of medicine I can't. Naturopaths. There were a lot of different forms of medicine being practiced. Today we'd call it holistic. We'd call it alternative. The U.S. had more doctors per capita than any country in Europe, and by far, because we were a pioneering, frontier country. We had a very practical attitudes towards medicine. We wanted people to feel better, and we didn't want to kill them in the process. The standard of care when the AMA was founded were drugs that had mercury in them on purpose, not by accident. Drugs that had arsenic in them on purpose, not by accident. One of the great treatments was to give somebody a drug that would make them vomit their guts out, and somehow that was supposed to help them. The father of our country, George Washington, his last day on earth, he was being given all these arsenic and mercury laced drugs, and he was being bloodlet. I think they took 2.4 liters of blood out of him, and they wonder why he died. And again, we're all going to die, but we don't have to die at a doctor's hands. So our at the core of the American medical system is the AMA, and the AMA from day one wanted to eliminate all competition. They wanted a drug-based. Now, in those days, the drugs they liked were related to mercury and arsenic. But today it's a whole nother batch of poisons. But they were monopolists then. They're monopolists now. You were forbidden from even talking to a physician in another school of thought. You couldn't compare notes. You couldn't accept a patient from somebody who was from another school of thought. You couldn't send one of your patients, right? So this was baked into the AMA. And then what the AMA did, and a lot of people know this story, I'm sure, is in conjunction with the Rockefellers, who are at the root of so much evil in this country, in the early 1900s, they did a scorched earth program, and they succeeded through. This is in my book. It's a bit too complicated for a podcast, but they basically used this very elaborate program to basically drive every other medical school out of business that was not AMA friendly.
Yeah.
So that's why we're in the pickle that we're in. It wasn't just COVID. COVID was sort of the crescendo. It was the obvious conclusion. If you give one batch of doctors all the power in the world, you give the pharmaceutical companies all the power over their doctors, and you allow them to be authoritarian. And I think that's my subtitle for my Fauci book was The Roots of Medical Authoritarianism in America, something like that. But even before, I see someone's got a message about the number of stillbirths, and we have no idea how many young women were made sterile or injured severely. How many pregnancies were terminated? That
we don't know.
We don't know. Let's see, a big press conference. Yeah, God bless her. God bless her.
And I hope I don't know anything going on with those that lawsuit they had in California. I'm again, if Scott Schara lost his trial before a jury, I don't know what chance any of us have in this stuff. But you mentioned vaccines, and in my book Crimes and Cover-ups in American Politics, 1776, 1963, I went over how the cancer explosion. Cancer was pretty much unknown before 1900. And if you look at the leading causes of death in 1900, the cancer was barely there. And they did a study in England about 15 years ago where they studied thousands of mummies, and they could find virtually no evidence of cancer in any of them. And I have some quotes from doctors in there about when vaccines began really to be introduced in the late 1800s into society. this is when you started hearing about cancer, and you have lots of doctors that instantly saw, hey, there's a correlation here. We never really saw this cancer before, and now we have vaccines. Is there a connection? So I don't know if your book touches on that or not.
I don't. Well, I'll tell you. Let me tell you a book that gets into that really well. That's existing right now. It's by Marc Girardot, and it's called "The Needle's Secret." And he says he's doing the same thing. He's showing the death rates from all these diseases that increase as the number of vaccines increase. And he points out something that's so obvious, but unless somebody points it out to you, every injection is an invasive medical procedure. Whether they like to make nothing of, oh, it's just a shot. No, it's an invasive medical procedure. Every invasive medical procedure has hazards. Okay, even if you have the purest vaccine in the world, which is very unlikely that you're going to get a pure shot.
Right.
But even if it's the purest stuff in the world, for instance, there are those muscle guys that like to build the big muscles, and a lot of all those guys, not a lot, all those guys are on steroids, and they're injecting themselves with steroids on a regular basis. They're super careful. It's not like you're going to Walmart, not Walmart, but Walgreens or and you got some barely educated person injecting you with something. These are guys injecting themselves or being injected by training partners. So they're being super, super careful. Even when they are super, 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 super careful, like 1 or 2 times out of 100, they get a hot shot and it gets straight into the bloodstream. So the theory of vaccination is it goes into the muscle and it just slowly leaches in a very peaceful, gradual way, and the body can handle it. Well, even a group of people that are super careful, at least 1 out of 100 times, it goes straight in, and it is bad. Like now with steroids, you get like breathing problems, and it goes away, but it's a really bad experience. So these things are not injected carefully. For example, there's a thing called I'm going to forget the name of it, but if you're doing a vaccination carefully, you stick the needle in, and then you pull the plunger out, and if blood comes in, it means you've hit something. You don't want to hit a capillary. Ideally you want to hit muscle tissue. Now, the reality is every muscle is infused with blood, so you're going to hit the bloodstream one way or another. But you certainly don't want to, like, once you put that needle in and pull the plunger out, you certainly don't want to see blood coming back, because that means you've hit a vein or something, right?
Right.
Now, during COVID, again, throwing out all medical history, they said, it's called aspiration. That's what's called aspiration. They told all these people doing the injections, don't bother to aspirate. Doesn't matter. Okay? And it does matter. It does matter a lot. And there's a place, what is it called? They sell electronics. It's went out of business up around here, but it still exists. One of these huge mega electronics store with the big TVs and everything. They went out of business near me. So during COVID, they turned it into an injection factory. So I'm in the mall and I'm walking by this thing, and I mean, unsanitary, disorganized. I mean, I wouldn't go in there and eat lunch, let alone go in there and let some random person inject something into me. And then how about the drive-in? Remember the drive-in injections?
Oh, yes.
I mean, what are you talking about? It's crazy.
Well, I mean, they were. I mean, look what they had public officials trying to give you free donuts and French fries. And I mean, I mean, as we said at the time, look, you have people, diabetics who can't afford insulin. You have why isn't that free for? Why is this? Why are you trying to do this? So we know they don't care about your health. Yeah. I mean, anybody that's said, I worked for the medical industrial complex. I saw they obviously don't care about your health at all, and that's why it's not that surprising. Some of the stuff, at least with the hospital protocol thing, but when you saw RFK Jr. testifying at his hearings to get his nomination accepted, you saw the power of that lobby. The way, I mean, they were so high, and of course he had to shamefully try to kiss their ass and say, I'm not going to do this and that. But I mean, vaccines. I mean, they were so committed to
Yeah.
this. And I was like, as this, there's no criticism allowed. And it's like,
Yeah.
what it's, I mean, I don't know what you thought if you watched those hearings, but I was fascinated by it.
Oh yeah. I mean, it show, you see who's bought and paid for. And in the case of pharma, they seem to own all of them. There's very few. I think Johnson up in, is it Minnesota? Senator Johnson, or
Yeah.
Wisconsin. There's a handful that aren't owned, but it's a handful, and the rest of them are just ready to line up. You're not allowed to. So I don't go after in my book, I don't go into the particulars of the science. I just tell the actual story of the history of vaccination, and I use the stories that the medical industrial complex uses. Like they talk about, Washington inoculated the troops against smallpox and saved the day. They talk about Louis Pasteur. They talk about polio and all this stuff. When you actually break down the reality behind all those stories, it's insane. Like, just so you know, for your listeners to know, the very first time, because these injected vaccines is only started in the late 19th century. So this is not even 150 years old. And you got to ask this question, right? We've had medicine in this world for many, many millennia. We're all here, so that means somebody was doing something right. Otherwise, humanity would have died off. But it never occurred to Chinese medicines, Chinese doctors, or doctors from India, or doctors from the Muslim world to ever inject anything in people. That's a 19th century invention. And the very first injected vaccine, here's the literal story. This is by Pasteur, Louis Pasteur. A kid was bit by a dog. The mother was sure the dog had rabies. The dog was never tested, but the mother was sure. Okay, fair enough. They bring him to Louis Pasteur, 240 miles away. I'm trying to figure out how that happened. And he took the ground up spine and brain of it was either a dog or a rabbit that had been powderized, and mixed it with water and injected it into this kid. Now, you don't know if the kid had rabies either. He had no symptoms. He'd been bitten bad. Dog bites are bad. And they injected this thing into him 9 times. And because he didn't die of rabies, they declared they had a successful vaccine for rabies. And folks, that's the beginning of the history of vaccinations in this world. That's the science.
Louis Pasteur, that's a hero.
You can't, and here's the thing with Pasteur, and it's in my book. He was a great industrial chemist. So, for example, he helped people, because people, it's a long story, but let me tell you, it might be interesting to people. Most things, the smallpox thing. Oh my God, I mean, that thing, I'm writing a chapter on that right now. And guys, they called everything smallpox. And here's the other thing. You know what the cure for smallpox was? Drugs that had mercury in it, and drugs that had antimony. Is that how you say it? Antimony? Antimony? Anyway.
Antimony, I think.
Both of those heavy metals, by the way, which no doctor today in their right mind would give anybody, both those doctors have as a side effect skin rashes and pustules on the skin. So the very treatment for the pox was a set of drugs that was going to make your skin burst out. So how much of smallpox was actually ever real? Now, do people get sick? Yes. Do people die? Yes. Do weird things happen with people's dermatologically? Yes. All that stuff happens. But did everybody who they said had smallpox throughout the ages actually have it? Or did they have chickenpox? Or did they just have some other disease? Or did they have a rash or whatever? But in any event, the birth of modern vaccination injected was that story that I just told you. Now Pasteur was already super famous because he did a lot of cool things. Like everybody used to like distill liquor at home or at the, one guy would do it for the town. Well, when things became industrialized, you suddenly had an industrial food process. So instead of, it being done on a small scale, everything was to be done on this vast, large scale. And when you do it on a large scale, when things go wrong, they go really wrong. So Pasteur came in and figured out how to make liquor better. He figured out how to make wine better so it didn't go bad. He figured out how to make milk, so pasteurized milk. He saved the silk industry because all the silk moths were dying in France, because instead of having a few of them, they tried to pack them into these huge silk. That was the birth of industrial farming, was, believe it or not, silkworms, right? And so he was very good at figuring out, okay, here's how we're gonna make it possible to have industrial food production. So he was famous. He saved silk was a huge industry to France, believe it or not. So he transformed France's economy. He saved it. And so when he showed up with his crazy voodoo story about injecting a boy who was bit by a dog with the ground up spine of a rabbit, they went, yeah, man, this is great. So anyway, every single milestone of vaccine history, right up until COVID, when you peel back a little bit of it and you get to what actually happened, it's as crazy as the Pasteur story. So let me put it this way. There may be vaccine science out there. I haven't found it yet. What I have found is a lot of bullshit. And I also, interestingly enough, every time we have a major breakthrough in vaccines, there's always some amazing PR, world-class PR. It turns out that Louis Pasteur's son-in-law was a journalist, and his father was a very politically connected journalist. His son-in-law was so high-powered that his first job out of college was to be assistant to the guy that became president of France. Then he married Louis Pasteur's daughter, and then he became Louis Pasteur's PR agent. So Louis Pasteur had one of the most high-powered PR agents in 19th century France under his roof, helping him peddle all his nonsense. And we see that the polio thing was peddled actually by one of the biggest PR geniuses of all time. Mm-hmm. Everybody's heard of Edward Bernays. Oh, sure. This is the guy that taught Edward Bernays, is the guy that sold the polio thing, the March of Dimes. For instance, they say FDR had polio, right? Mm-hmm. FDR probably did not have polio. He probably had some other problem because it occurred late in life, as he was already an adult. Polio, it's all in the book, and it's a little too much for a podcast unless I can lay it all out. But polio, they said, happened to small children. So FDR did not probably even have polio, and yet they used the fact that FDR had polio as a way to galvanize the whole nation to come up with a cure, right?
The great hero, Louis Pasteur, yeah.
Yeah. So what you have in vaccination is absolute nothing burger science bordering on voodoo. In fact, voodoo is more sophisticated than the science they used. And you have world-class black belt public relations people pumping the story. So anyway, that's the book. It's called, you know how it is. You write a book and you're like,
yeah.
It's called, so it's based on this saying, to err is human, to persist in error is diabolical. So the book is called Diabolical Error. So that's our medical system. And again, if you break a leg, can they help you? Yes. There's a lot of things they can do to help you. But you've got to be a very educated consumer. And on the drug level, all you have to do, if somebody prescribes your drug, you better find out what the adverse reactions are, because I guarantee your doctor will not. And so if you have to,
you're right. Duke Valentino in the chat room has asked a couple of times. He likes to ask these questions. What do we think of the chemo scam? He thinks chemotherapy is a scam, and a lot of people do. Are you any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, here's the weird thing about it. You've already pointed out that apparently there wasn't a whole lot of cancer going on until they started injecting people all the time with stuff.
Yeah.
And the book, the Needle Secret, just talks about the biophysics. It's not even chemical. There's a biophysical problem with repeatedly injecting stuff into people. Surprisingly enough, it messes up your circulatory system. And your circulatory system, it sounds like, well, it's just one of many systems that you have. Well, it's true, but it's kind of like the system. Like if there's something interfering with the healthy circulation of your body, that's the source of like 99% of all serious disease. I mean, that's the source of diabetes. That's the source of cancer. It's the source of everything you can imagine. So you were asking about cancer. Well, what's weird about cancer, and going back to Rockefeller, God bless him, he never took a course in science or medicine in his life. And the guy that was his advisor, Frederick T. Gates, was a preacher turned fundraiser turned agent to Rockefeller. He never studied science either. But those two guys were allowed or had the power to impose an industrial, chemical, manufacturing mindset on medicine. And what's that famous clinic in New York City? It's got the big name. Anyway, that thing was fun. Sloan Kettering.
Yes.
That thing was funded. One of the funders, I think it was Kettering, he happened to have a huge amount of uranium shares in various uranium mines. And it was very motivational for him. And he was a true believer that radiating people is the cure for cancer. So he's the funder of Sloan Kettering, one of them. The other one is a guy that ran GM, right? So what's terrible is when billionaires decide that they want to get involved in medicine, like Rockefeller, like Bill Gates, like Sloan and Kettering. I'll tell you a true story. This is an amazing story. Bloomberg, right? The guy that ran New York. I have to say this carefully. I have a friend, and his cousin became president of one of the biggest medical schools in the world. Okay, I don't want to rat anybody out because my friend, but big school, like you'd recognize the name. The day he was given that job, he got a phone call. Warren Buffett sent a private jet to pick him up and take him to Bill Gates's house for a talk. And Bloomberg called him up and said, "Here's how it works. As long as I'm alive, I give. Don't fuck up." That's how disrespectful he was to this man who had just become president of one of the foremost medical schools in the United States. So when billionaires decide that they know medicine and the human body, and they're going to impose, like Rockefeller learned how to make money refining oil, and Bill Gates learned how to make money writing software. When they decide that they can transfer that industrial mindset to the human body, to the creation, to nature, and they're going to and it's going to be authoritarian, by the way, right? It's not going to be like you figure it out. You got to do what we tell you. That's when we're on the wrong track. And that's between the AMA selling us out, and they were founded to sell us out from day one, between the various billionaires deciding that they want to industrialize the practice of medicine for their own crazy reasons. In addition, and then we've got the researchers who are, they just want to feather their own nest and, enjoy a rich lifestyle with all kinds of discoveries that they've made. And then we have the idiot news media that will tell people anything. You got to look around. You have to look at how incredibly beautifully the creation is. The trees, the birds, the rabbits, the deer, the fresh air, the oceans. It's amazing. And guess what? You're part of creation. You're as amazing as all those things. Will you die? Yes. Might you get sick? Yes. Might you experience pain? Yes. But you've also been built with a very strong self-healing capacity. Learn about it. It's a study. Don't undermine your health, and don't hand your health over to a guy just because he happened to spend a few years in school. Maybe he can help you, maybe he can't, but you've got to know what they're doing and why they're doing it. So anyway, that's
no, it's fantastic. And you obviously, I agree with you. I think most of my audience does as well. I don't know if in the time we have, Fauci's first fraud, I assume, or I have not had a chance to read it, that you're talking about what happened with AIDS?
So I put that film out in August of 2020. Okay, this is early. And this was a year before Bobby Kennedy's book, The Real Anthony Fauci, came out. And I was a pretty major contributor to that book. You can go to Roman numeral page 13 on the acknowledgments, and I'm right there.
Oh, cool.
Right with Malone and all these other people. And I and Celia Farber and John Lariston, we had a big influence on the AIDS content that Kennedy put in that book. He was going to have something about it, but now he ended up with 5 chapters on it, because AIDS was a kind of like a dress rehearsal for COVID. And that may sound kind of weird to people, but if you look at the stage managing. What was AIDS? Well, we were told there was a virus, and the virus came from God knows where, but maybe a monkey. And it spread everywhere. You know, you don't know how it spread, but you could get it, and it spread through sex, which meant if you had sex with somebody, and they had sex with somebody, and they had sex with somebody, 10,000 people down the line, you were now suddenly at risk. And they told people if you got it, you're dead. And this was you remember, like back in the 80s.
Of course.
Who's that? Yeah, but young people don't know that. You know, young people can't imagine. But I was in my 20s then, and Oprah Winfrey, who used to have this huge show. I think she had 40 million viewers. I mean, that's power, man. She did a show in late 1980s. And she said, by 1990, 1 out of 5 of you in my audience will be dead.
I remember that.
You remember that. Good. A lot of people, they've scrubbed that from the internet. I would love to find that clip, but I know
porn. Yeah, well, it makes her look so bad, but they were. You talk about it was a dress rehearsal for COVID, because I mean, I remember I was working a blue collar job at the time, and as a young guy, and we were terrified that because we were working in a hospital. And they had special bags for AIDS, and we were like terrified to touch the bags, and we all thought, God, we're going to die being around this stuff. And it was terrible. We had special meetings about it and everything, and then the fear was everywhere. And of course, you were scared of everybody, although it was mostly gays that were said to get it, and then later drug users. So if it wasn't too fearful of that, but still there was a lot of fear about everything. And as it turned out, it was.
They made it sound like it was wildly contagious and anybody could get it at the drop of a hat. That was that was a big part of it, just like COVID. They also said if you get it, you're a goner, just like COVID in the early days. And they said anybody can get it. That was a big PR push. Hey, it's not just gay guys, it's not just intravenous drug users, it's everybody, right? Now, here's the deal. AIDS. Autoimmune deficiency syndrome. Whenever you see the word syndrome, it means it's not a disease. And it's not a classic disease. A classic disease is we know what causes it, we know the course of the disease, and we have an idea of how to treat it. Syndrome means there's all this stuff happening to you. We don't know what the heck it is, so we're going to call it the ABC syndrome. Just so you know that, folks. Like when they say restless leg syndrome. Right? They used to try to sell drugs to you got a restless leg, take these drugs. No, if they're calling it a syndrome, it means they don't have a freaking clue what it is. All right. So that's the first thing you need to know. The second thing you need to know is catastrophic collapse of the immune system is real. It happens, but it happens under very rare circumstances. All right. So the people who were getting AIDS, quote, getting AIDS from the virus, were people who were one of 3 categories: intravenous drug users, hemophiliacs, or a small segment of the male homosexual community. A small segment. Okay? Now, the AIDS-like syndromes have been around way before AIDS appeared. And it appeared in intravenous drug users. Why? Well, your blood's kind of important to your immune system. If you're shooting yourself up with random crap 5 to 10 times a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, you're probably going to wreck your immune system. So that's why intravenous drug users got AIDS. But remember, they were getting AIDS back in 1910. Okay. Now, who else got it? People with hemophilia. Well, the treatment for hemophilia involved a ton of chemicals and blood transfusions that had a lot of chemical preservatives in it. So these poor folks were getting inundated with chemicals on a massive scale. That's going to hurt your immune system. Right? Makes sense, right? Now, the third group was this small percentage of male homosexuals. Now, Fauci said, one day I was reading the CDC medical surveillance journal, and I saw that this weird case of 4 young, otherwise healthy young men developed this syndrome. Well, they weren't young. they were 35. By the time you're 35, you've had at least 15 years to ruin your body. They weren't healthy. They were all drug addicts, and and they were also involved in the most extreme practices. And what are these practices? And again, small percentage of the population, not the whole gay population, but it was not uncommon for guys to go out and go to a bathhouse, go to a club, go to wherever, drink all night, takes drugs all night. And we're going to talk about another special drug called poppers that were unique to that community, and have sex with 4, 5, 6, 7 random strangers. And when you do that, you tend to get sexually transmitted diseases, whether you're gay or not gay. It's probably not a healthy thing to do. So with these guys, what do you do when you get a sexually transmitted disease? You get on antibiotics. So it was not unusual for the small percentage of people in that community to be on antibiotics 4, 5, 6, 7 times a year. And some of them got to the point where they said, screw it, I'll just take antibiotics all the time. Now, if you know what antibiotics do to you, it's not very good. And before AIDS appeared, they were having all kinds of not bizarre, but uncharacteristic health problems in San Francisco among that small segment of a larger population of people. They were having like the kind of diseases that you get when you're living in the third world with no sanitation. And they were trying to understand, well, why are we getting this in San Francisco? Well, these guys had ruined their immune systems by having repeated sexually transmitted diseases with tons and tons of antibiotics. Then they'd go out and drink and smoke and do, right? But there was another drug. This is the key point, called poppers, and it's amyl nitrate. You would break it and inhale it. If you're having a heart attack, that's a good thing. You don't want to have a heart attack, but if you do, it opens up all your blood vessels really fast. The problem is it's known to be carcinogenic. And so it's like one of these, now it won't be carcinogenic if you do it once in an emergency, but if you're doing that 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times a night, this drug was very, very popular among a small percentage of a larger community. So much so that you would go to a club or a bathhouse and they'd have a bar, and they'd also have poppers you could buy. And poppers was a chemical that, you can make it for a penny and sell it for $10. So it was extremely lucrative business. And the money from those poppers subsidized all of the gay publications, all the gay newspapers. So none of the news about how dangerous this was ever appeared in the gay newspapers. And the CDC, they were well aware. It's in my film, the film that came out called Fauci's First Fraud.com. CDC was absolutely 100% aware that this small percentage of a larger community was doing poppers every day, multiple times a day. And they knew it was carcinogenic because they know that drug was carcinogenic. They had papers up to the moon stacked up. But what they did was they separated it. Like they said, oh, well, that's those studies. We've never actually studied these guys, so therefore we don't know what it will do to them. So where did people first get AIDS? They would get what do you call it? Tumors in their nose and in their throat. The other thing they would get, Kaposi sarcoma, right? That's what they would get in the nose and the throat. Normally, that's something that gets on the skin of like a 90-year-old Mediterranean guy that's been in the sun every day of his life. But these guys were getting it in their nose and their throat. The other disease that they got, and these were already known diseases. These weren't brand new diseases. It was just weird that young men were getting them. The other disease they would get would have fungal infection in their lungs. Now, do you have to be a doctor to know if you're snorting a toxin 5, 6, 7 times a night, 6, 7 nights a week, every week for years, that you might hurt your nasal passages and you might hurt your throat and you might hurt your lungs? But the CDC couldn't figure that out. And they deliberately said there is no connection between that lifestyle, they called it a lifestyle, and this disease. Well, there absolutely was a connection between that lifestyle and that disease. So so instead of just like telling those guys, hey guys, you're killing yourselves. If you want to do it, go ahead. But we recommend you stop. Instead, what did they do? They said to the whole world, everybody can get this. It's instantly transmissible. And in the 1980s, and Don knows, and I know, they scared the bejesus out of all of us. We thought we were all going to die. So when AZT appeared, AZT was a drug that had been banned for human. You couldn't even experiment with it on people.
Yeah.
Why? Because it simulated AIDS. It precipitated a catastrophic collapse of the immune system. That's how bad this drug was. So what did they do? They did a what is that thing that they did with remdesivir? They did a to speed it up, where the emergency use authorization. That's where they first came up with that trick. The reason I'm going off on the AIDS story is they used the same exact playbook. So without all the details, what's the playbook? There's a virus. It came from a monkey out of Africa. Everybody can get it. It's easily transmissible. If you get it, you're dead, and you're going to die a miserable death. And we don't have anything. So you just have to wait till there's a cure. And then, they kept us on boiling on the stove for a couple of, years, in the AIDS case, several months in the COVID case, so that when the cure was available, the people that were terrorized, and it was a terror campaign, just ran. They didn't walk to get killed. They ran to get killed by AZT. And John Lorison believes that at least, and this is a Harvard-trained statistician and a gay activist, right? He believed that 300,000 gay men alone were killed by AZT.
Oh, so look what happened after, and again, Fauci pushed this so much, and I'm sure, but after they stopped giving AZT, AIDS pretty much was no big deal anymore.
Well, no, actually, you know what really happened? This is so crazy. In the early 80s, there weren't that many people that had AIDS. Like, there was like 10,000 people in the whole country. Now, it's sad for them, but statistically, I'm not worried about anything that happens to 10,000 people medically. It's too small a drop. You're talking about 100,000, a million. Now I'm like, okay, 10,000 is nothing, right? They didn't start dying in large numbers until AZT came out. And the death rate went through the roof. And they said, oh, these poor fellows, they died of AIDS, right? Then they realized, wow, this is bad. So then they created the cocktail. And so what they did was they lowered the dose dramatically. They threw in some other fake things, some BS. And then they put people on the cocktail for life. Now, since here's the thing, AIDS is not a dying disease. Okay. I mean, if you're really far gone, you're going to die. But if you restore your immune system by stop the drinking, stop the drugs, stop the poppers, stop the antibiotics, eat decent food, sleep, don't contract 10 different sexually transmitted diseases a year, your immune system has a chance to recover. And like I said, look at the trees, look at the birds, look at the grass. Every time the spring comes, everything comes back. The winter kills everything off. Nature's strong. You're part of nature. You're strong too. If you don't hit yourself in the head with a sledgehammer, you won't get sledgehammer headaches, right? So it's not a dying disease. But they convinced that community, and now there's a drug called Truvada, and they're telling young people, and they're doing this under the radar, and I've seen to be the only person talking about it, that if they're at risk, now at risk means you're gay, and you might even be a gay woman, but anyone's gay is suddenly at risk of AIDS, right? And so they're telling these kids, well, now you may be a person that's monogamous, right? You're not going to any clubs. You're not but they're telling you just the fact that you're gay, you need to be on Truvada for the rest of your life, right? That's the scam they're running now. And there's a guy who, oh God, I wish I could remember the details. He runs media to this community. He runs nightclubs and resorts for this community and encourages, wild behavior. And he also has shares in Truvada because he makes money when Truvada is out. Oh, he has a Truvada distribution service. He runs ads on the web and says, hey, you're gay. Do what everyone who's gay does. Get on Truvada. So this guy's running the media. He's running a drug service where you give him $29 a month or whatever it is, and he mails it to you. And then he's running nightclubs and resorts, right? So the sinisterness of this is unbelievable. But the main point, because some people may say, well, this doesn't affect me. It affects you to the degree that they use the same playbook. And it was the same guy. Because I always say, listen, you can't have a scam without a scammer. And you can't be a scammer without a playbook. So when Fauci reared his ugly head, I immediately knew, oh boy, this is going to be bad. And then I just started piecing together and watching the thing unfold. And I said, this is AIDS all over again, except they've cast a wider net. And they will do it again. And take this back to our original conversation. All these things that I described, all these protocols where you go in healthy and you come out in a bag, they're still in play. Like, it hasn't been exposed. It hasn't been dismantled. They could just put that key in the engine, turn it up. Oh, and by the way, this is another thing that's important. People would ask me, well, but Ken, everybody realized that COVID was a problem overnight. Like, all the doctors, all the countries, all the public health officials, it must have been real. I said, no, you cannot be a public health official. You cannot run a hospital. You cannot be a public, doctor, with a high profile if you do not genuflect at the virus. HIV creates AIDS, creates death. You can't be in public health. You can't be a reporter. You can't be a governor. You can't be the mayor of a town. They will run you out of town. So there was already this mechanism that Fauci had built using AIDS money. And talk about AIDS money. How much money do you think has been spent just on medical research alone to find the cure? $500 billion in cash. Okay. So they have they've wired the entire public health arena, all the news media people, all the public health officials, all the governors, all the mayors, all the county executives, that when they say virus, the answer is yes, sir. And if you're not that guy, you're not in that job. So that's why COVID took off so fast. It was pre-wired.
And because there were so many parallels to COVID, because in terms of AIDS, where you had this same kind of dubious tests, HIV test, which you don't know what that is even, but these, a lot of times they were asymptomatic, which means not sick, which is
most of the time,
yeah, because that
no symptoms at all.
I'm a homosexual. I've had sex with a lot of people. I better run and get tested. One of my friends has it. So, and oh my God, I'm HIV positive. And then you get on AZT, and suddenly you're incredibly sick, and most of you died. I mean, that's horrible what happened. And the thing about it is that that's in the woke world. You think that Fauci would be an incredible villain just for that, because how many gay people died, but he's not. He's
an absolute hero. And there are millions of people who romanticize the great struggle, because they oh my God, they turned it into a political struggle. It's like, oh, the government's not giving us AZT. They're depriving us of AZT. So they would go and they'd march and they'd wave signs and they'd beg for their AZT. And then they'd be dead in 6 months. And there are people who think still we triumphed. We forced the government to pay attention to the health needs of gay men.
Yeah.
They killed hundreds of thousands of gay men. Yeah. It's wacky. It's wacky. And interestingly enough, some of the infrastructure, some of the shock troops for pushing the COVID agenda were former AIDS activists, high-level AIDS activists. There's a guy, I wish I could remember his name. He really deserves to be called out. He's at Yale University, and he's the guy that came up with the 6-foot distance. Remember that?
Oh, yes.
There is no science behind it. He wrote an article
pull that out of the air. Yeah, you just pull that out of that. Yeah.
He wrote an article for the New York Times, and of course, the New York Times printed him because he's part of the cabal. And he just said, "Oh yeah, based on a study, 6 feet is the right distance." There was no study. That's why if you had to span 6 feet, if you had to stand on your head, it was because of this jerk in Yale who was a professional AIDS activist. And what was his job? During the AIDS crisis, his job was to be the liaison between the gay community and the pharmaceutical industry, making sure that they provided that community with all the drugs possible.
Well, and I bet he didn't talk about the original beginning. This is not some monkey in Africa, but spreading out of Fort Detrick, where they specifically asked for, it was what do you call it? Hepatitis test. And they asked specifically for very active gay males or something. That's what they wanted the participants. What does hepatitis have to do with that? And that I don't know if you know the story behind that, but that had something to do, I think, with triggering this. And it's pretty obvious. Why would you ask for, promiscuous gay males or something like that?
Yeah.
What sense does that make?
Yeah. I mean, it's a different kind of community. There's sort of a yin yang between men and women. Men are kind of like, yeah, let's go. And women are like, well, hang on a second. Let me get to know you better. When you take that away and it's just men and young men who've been told, do whatever you want, there's a percentage of them that, they go crazy. And it's not healthy. It's not healthy for heterosexuals to live that way. It's not healthy for anybody to live that way. And again, we're talking about a small percentage in a large community. I keep having to emphasize that. But the guy that invented the PCR technology, he never called it a test. He said, well, because he didn't believe the AIDS virus was the cause of it. It's so
Carrie Mullis, right?
Carrie Mullis,
who died right before COVID took off.
He died the summer before. He died the summer before COVID hit, and the deal is they would give you a test, and they called it the AIDS test, but it wasn't really an AIDS test. And you said something earlier, which is really important. Asymptomatic. Asymptomatic is another way of saying healthy. There's nothing wrong with you. Right? So you could go a totally healthy guy and take the AIDS test and find out. And by the way, I remember not that long ago, it was like 2000. I wanted to get life insurance. I had to get an AIDS test, not because I was part of any particular community, but it was like, oh, we don't give life insurance to anybody that's HIV positive, right? Mm-hmm. So they had to get the test. So I'm on pins and needles. I'm like, holy God, do I have this thing? I don't know. But anyway, a perfectly healthy person goes, they call it the AIDS test, but it's not an AIDS test. It's an HIV test. But it's not really an HIV test. It's a test to see if there's any kind of genetic fragments in your blood that might possibly have some relation to this thing that we call the HIV virus. But we've never really seen the HIV virus clearly, but we know it's there by projection, and we know what sort of some of the fragments would be. So if you've got any of these fragments, and so the way PCR works is they take a piece of genetic material and they cycle, they call it cycling, and they amplify it and they make it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And Carrie Mullis designed that for people that were doing genetics research, because the more material you have, the more experiments you can do, and the time it takes to grow genetic material, it's too slow. So he came up with PCR, which means you could take a small thing and just amplify it and have a lot of stuff. So he said you should never be using this as a diagnostic, because you can take anything. Like, this is a true story. Before COVID, there was a story in New York City. They went through New York City and did swabs of the subway. And they categorized every disease they found. They found every single disease known to man on the seats, on the poles, on the hand. People weren't dying from it. But if you had taken that little fragment and put it in a PCR process, you could have scared people to death and said, "Oh my God, there's plague in the New York subway. We're all going to die." Well, there might be plague in the New York subway, and it might be a fragment so big that everybody's immune system just bangs it off. Anyway, it's
it was absolutely. We've only got less than 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure we don't miss it. You said you wanted to talk a little bit about something at the beginning of the show about
it does dovetail, and I'll keep it short. Everybody knows about Operation Paperclip, where the U.S. went to Germany and scooped up as many scientists as it could find, and brought them back to the United States, and they basically laundered their identities and sheep dipped them and made them seem like upstanding citizens. What you don't hear much about are the Nazi doctors that were brought into the United States. Like, you hear about Mengele and what a bad guy he was, and they're willing to talk about that, and they eliminated Mengele. But there were a lot of guys at Mengele's level that were actually brought into the United States and integrated into medical research. And that's hardly ever talked about. And the thing that's never talked about, the reason I'm bringing this up is there's a guy that we were talking about him before. His name's Tim Weiner or Wiener, W-E-I-N.
Yeah.
And he was on a show that a friend of mine has, and he was just blowing absolute smoke, right? I mean, he's obviously the official biographer of the CIA. That's why you don't get a Pulitzer Prize for doing hard-hitting reporting on the CIA, right? So he was saying, well, the U.S. never did torture until after 9/11, and the only reason we did it was we were just scared out of our minds. Unfortunately, that's not true. And this speaks to medicine and how the medical world works. So after World War II, immediately after World War II, the U.S. Set up torture centers in Germany. They hired former Nazi doctors who had been experimenting on various torture methods in the camps, hired them, and ran all kinds of experiments on seeing, hey, how can we get information out of people? And they some of their victims were former Nazis, ironically. That you had Nazi doctors killing. And by the way, they killed in these interrogations. They not uncommonly killed the people they were interrogating, right? So all that stuff that supposedly only just started after 9/11, and it was some bad apples at the CIA, and no, it's not the way things are. The CIA actually had that going on immediately after World War II. They did it in Germany, and they used electric shock. They used super psychoactive drugs. They used sleep deprivation. They used just plain old torture. And a lot of people have heard of Frank Olson, the CIA scientist that fell out of a hotel window.
Yes.
And there's a lot of mystery. Well, why did it even happen? It happened because he got a promotion. And as part of his promotion, he was sent over to England and Germany to observe these torture sessions. This was in 1953. And he didn't know these things existed. And he watched people die as in the middle of a interrogation system. So, whatever. He came back and he was telling his friends, I got to get out of this. This is the most horrific thing I've ever seen. And I guess, you can't have loose lips if you work for the CIA. And they took him on a retreat and dosed him with LSD. And once they overdosed him, they could then say, you got some psychiatric problems. We're going to take you to a special doctor in New York. They brought him to New York, and they brought him to a hotel room. And next thing you know, I don't know, it was 14 floors later, he's on the pavement. And people talk about Frank Olson, but they don't talk about the fact that Frank Olson was exposed, saw what we were doing, what the CIA was doing way back in the 40s. So this guy, Tim Weiner or whatever his name is, getting on a podcast, telling everybody that, it was the president that ordered the torture and the CIA didn't want to do it. And they never do bad things. And it's brand new in American history. No. It was one of the very first projects, 48. As soon as the CIA was incorporated, that was one of the very first things they started doing, studying how to basically disintegrate human beings through torture. So, and it was doctors doing the work. So there are some good doctors out there, but there's some really bad ones too. So you just have to know your own health. You don't have to go to the gym and lift weights and run on a treadmill, but you got to move every day. You got to, eat the food that God made, not something that comes out of a box. Sometimes you have to, but, do your best to eat real food. Get out in the beautiful fresh air, learn about health. If doctor says you got to do something, research it to death. Really become, all this stuff we all like to research. Well, research that as well and keep yourself safe. So
there's no doubt about that. We didn't even get to talk about John F. Kennedy, anti-imperialist. So that's everybody here knows my affinity for JFK. So
if you have a minute, I'll give you the punchline.
Give it. Go ahead, please.
Okay. When JFK was a young man, senator from Massachusetts, when there was no political gain to be made, he got on the floor of the Senate and gave a 5,000-word speech in support of the liberation of Algeria.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then when he became president and de Gaulle finally threw in the towel and said, let's stop this, Kennedy invited the newly elected president of Algeria to come to, and I invite everybody to go out onto the web and search on YouTube. You'll find it. That was the most lavish reception I have ever seen in my life given at the White House to anyone. military color guards, not three guys in a flag, 20 guys from each of the different branches, every head of every branch, cabinet. Jackie was there with John. They honored this freedom fighter, this Arab-speaking freedom fighter, and Kennedy was sending a message to the world by that reception. We're taking our foot off the neck of the poor countries in this world. We're not on board with colonialism. And he also was giving a message to the military. Okay, you guys may have, previous presidents may have sent you on some missions that you didn't want to be on. I'm not going to do that. And then, of course, a year later, he was dead.
Absolutely,
yeah.
You're right. And he was. I mean, he had a huge impact on me. Obviously, but he was the last idealist, not only anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist, but he not only had that very courageous stance for independent Algeria, but he supported all the independent movements in Africa and elsewhere. And the Alliance for Progress was an attempt to go around the CIA, and they're putting tin pot dictators everywhere. He wanted to support independence movements in all the poorer countries.
Exactly.
And, so he ran afoul of so many powerful people, but I can't say enough good words about him. So it's great that
we wouldn't have this situation in Gaza if he was president. Never would have happened. Never would have happened. He would have shut it down day one.
Yeah, no, he is, and he was at the time. We didn't find this out till later. And Michael Collins Piper, who wrote about the late Michael Collins Piper, who I just kind of got to know before he died very young, as these people tend to do. He wrote Final Judgment about the JFK assassination. He's the first one that found out about JFK's relationship with David Ben-Gurion, the first president of Israel, where he was involved with heated exchanges at the time of his death because he did not want Israel to develop nuclear weapons. And they were doing it.
Let me show you something. Hang on 1 second.
Sure.
I didn't send you this book.
Oh wow, cool, JFK, fantastic! Wow.
It's all it's all the letters, cables, and these were classified. So Don's talking about Kennedy was pushing back really hard on Israel because they want to develop nuclear weapons, and we all know Kennedy was against anybody having nuclear weapons. And he was pushing really hard. All these letters had been classified until the 21st century. So we had no way to know this. Now some people, like the fellow you mentioned, there was ways to get this information, but it was hard to get. His brother was also saying to the Israelis, look, you got to register your lobbyists just like everybody else.
Yes, he wanted to. So AIPAC that we see now, look at the Anti-Defamation League, the biggest censorship. I mean, they wanted to get them to register as foreign agents. I mean, people don't realize the stuff Kennedy was trying to do.
He was greater than we know. He was greater than most. And, they always slander him and they always trivialize him. Always this, he's that. He didn't really do that much. Oh no, this was just think what he did in 3 years from a standing start. Unbelievable. We lost.
No, we definitely lost. I think he was the last president that thought he was in charge, and I guess he found out that he wasn't. But I can't say enough good things about him. Well, Ken, we're just about out of time. I want to give you a chance, sum up whatever you want if we missed anything, and promote all you want to promote because you're doing obviously some great work.
Okay, well, if you're interested in the nurse's story, just go to whatthenursessaw.com. Same title as the book. If you're interested in the Fauci story, go to faucisfirstfraud.com. And if you're interested in JFK, go to antiwarjfk.com. And you can follow those books there. We have a beautiful country. We live on a beautiful planet. We've been given everything. And we got to protect what we've got because there are people that are working night and day to figure out how to take it away from us.
Absolutely, there's no question about it, Ken. This has been a fascinating show, and needless to say, those of you don't look for this on YouTube because I'm going to be taking it down within a minute or two after, but it'll be on Rumble, so it'll be over there, and we want to try to transition there anyhow. So because YouTube, they'll probably yank my channel for this show because that's all we talked about. And we
Yeah.
don't want the medical misinformation to get out there. That's what they say every time. So, Ken McCarthy, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll have to have you back because you can talk about so many things. It's incredible. So this was a fast 2 hours. So thanks so much for joining us. Thanks everybody for listening to I Protest. We'll see you next week, same time.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, sir.